Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is a regular meeting of the South Kingstown Planning Board, followed by a work session. The date is Thursday, November 10, 2022. The time is 7 p.m. The first item on our agenda is roll call. Joe Murphy.
Here.
Susan Axelrod. Here. Paul Jordan.
Here.
Liz Carp is absent. Peter DiStefano. Here. Robin Pothier.
Here.
And Maria Mack is here. Our first agenda item is under subdivision and land development projects. It's changed to a previously approved plan, major subdivision, comprehensive permit, the village at Curtis Corner. Jamie or Jay, would you like to?
Madam Chair, Jamie Rabbit,
Describe
Planning
the-
Director. I'll just touch upon a couple of items associated with the village at Curtis Corner. The planning board members should be in receipt of a memo dated November 8th, 2022, from the planning department staff regarding the application for a major subdivision comprehensive permit amendment to a previously approved plan. We do have a proposed draft motion associated with that. That begins on page 1 and ends on the page 2. There are, we'll say, new findings of facts as well as conditions of approval.
Questions, comments from board members?
Jamie, if you could just kind of review where we stand relative to the previous approval where we had the findings of facts for 100% for sale, of AMI for sale and 80% for rental. But then on the conditions of approval, we required as a condition of the approval of the application that it would be a 80% rental. Did you go back to look at any of the notes or commentary during the deliberations and have any?
We did look at that, and it was the primary discussions were associated with the rental, because for sale was not necessarily contemplated during the testimony, but it did carry over from earlier discussions of master plan about for sale at 100%. So your motion to do 100% for the for sale units and 80% if the units are rented is consistent with the testimony and kind of remarks that have been made throughout the process from conceptual master plan and preliminary.
And just to clarify, so we didn't restate the 100% max AMI for sale in this approval because we said prior conditions remain in full force and effect? Okay, and so it's 80% for rental, which is by state law, and the condition indicating prior conditions remain in full force and effect means that the 100% max AMI limitation on for sale units from the prior approval is still in effect.
So Joe, on our research that I did, I found no discussion regarding either an 80% or even a 120% of AMI for a for sale unit. Everything I found was 100% of AMI for a for sale unit.
That was the discussion specific to this application.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Jamie, on the primary changes are found in the paragraph that relates to just below the first paragraph of the motion where you've just added for rental or sale. And then the reference to the previous requirements and conditions, along with the additional condition relative to common areas and common ownership and a legal mechanism that would be required if necessary.
You are correct, Madam Chair.
Amy, are you comfortable with that the language in the second condition?
Yes.
Thanks. Anything else from anyone? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion?
I will make that motion. South Kingstown Planning Board hereby approves the requested amendment of the previously approved plan to allow for the purchase of rental of affordable units within the village at Curtis Corner Development. Specifically, the Planning Board approves amendment of condition 3B of the prior approval to read as follows. 3B, lots 4 through 6, 9 through 10, 14, and 20 through 21 shall be developable lots, each to contain a two-household detached structure or duplex, use code 11, with one housing unit in each duplex, dwelling deed restricted for rental or sale as an LMI housing unit, with findings of fact A through G and conditions of approval 1 and 2.
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second? Second from Peter. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Motion carries. Thank you. Our next agenda item is Development Plan Review, South County Healthcare System, Proposed New Institutional Master Plan for a Healthcare Institution, submitted for review. Jamie, would you like to give us a quick summary?
So, Madam Chair, again, you should have a review dated November 8th, 2022, regarding the Major Land Development Project Institutional Master Plan, 100 Kenyon Ave for South County Hospital. That application was submitted by Andrew Prescott, representing the hospital. It is a proposed institutional master plan per section 6032C for the government and institutional zone, GI. You do have the recommended motion as well as conditions and findings of fact. I would point out one thing that I would potentially propose to change on the conditions based on a conversation we had internally, is clarification on, just bear with me, under conditions, item number 4. As part of any future application to the planning board associated with campus improvements, that required stormwater infrastructure be installed or upgraded/improved, the hospital shall incorporate water quality management technologies, and I propose to insert the following language after the word technology, i.e. Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, quotes DEM, low impact storm guidelines, close parentheses, that is appropriate for the proposed improvements. So that was the primary change to the conditions. There was also a question on the regulatory considerations in the third paragraph beginning, as the planning board is aware. And I would just like to have Amy Goins just briefly go over the first 3 or 4 sentences there. And I believe Amy may have a small change to a word or 2.
Yes, just the second to last sentence that starts the standards and findings. So this is just making sure we're all on the same page, that the statutory required findings for approval that apply to subdivisions and land development projects don't apply here, because this is coming to the board under the development plan review framework, which again, it's a permitted use. The zoning ordinance just says that the hospital has to provide an institutional master plan that now, as we know, we amended the zoning ordinance, it's reviewed under the development plan review framework. So really, you're just looking to see whether the proposed institutional master plan as submitted is consistent with the terms of the zoning ordinance.
So, Amy, just for clarification, would we insert the word after the, being the statutory standard findings set forth in development Review Act.
Yes.
So we would insert the word statutory in the second to last sentence after the and before standard. Okay, sorry.
We're not in the motion language, this is just in the background material for the board.
So if you, sorry, page 1 of 3, regulatory considerations. I'm sorry, I should correct that. Page 2 of 3. You have at the top of the page, it says by 500. The next paragraph, as the planning board is aware, go down the right-hand side and look for the term, there's whereby to, and then the standards. We would insert the word statutory in between the and standard. So the statutory standard findings set forth in the Development Review Act.
Is everyone clear on that? I thought that when I first read that, it was a little bit contradictory to the previous sentence as well.
Madam Chair, we can put that on the screen if anyone's still concerned about that.
Sure. I think what was confusing is that there was, the initial paragraphs talks about DPR, Development Plan Review, and then it suddenly changes to, well, we're not going to use the normal process for approval of land development projects and subdivisions. And then it says that come under the, before the board under the framework of DPR. So it almost sounds like it's at first contradicting itself. I think adding statutory does help to clarify it.
So, Madam Chair, on the screen are the 2 last sentences in that paragraph with the insertion of the term statutory. And then just so you see the other language and condition number 4.
Can you scroll up a little bit? There was something else in red that I saw as you,
It's
oh,
just
it's just a typo.
capitalization.
Comments, questions from board members on any of this? Go ahead.
I have one question. At the end of conditions, condition number 5, it states that they have 6 months to submit plans. Is there a reason that we've given them a deadline of 6 months? And if it works out for them, assuming the town farm is transferred, that it must be done within 6 months?
And again, I'll read 5 aloud. If the transfer of the town farm parcel occurs, the hospital shall meet with the planning board to discuss the timeframes for development on the town farm parcel and provide conceptual plans for said property with proposed permitting and construction timeframes within 6 months of the transfer of title of the property. So it's a 6-month timeframe for them to come back in a work-type session to let you know what their timeframes are associated with construction and what type of conceptual program they've developed for that parcel. So it doesn't start the permitting process. It's just asking the hospital to come back before the planning board to have a discussion with them and inform them of their intentions to move forward with that project and the timeframes associated with that.
So if for some reason they decided to not act on this for 3 years, say, they would still need to come back within 6 months and then let it sit for a period and then potentially come back again. I guess my question is, if they decided not to act immediately, do we need to make them come back anyway, immediately?
So again, this language would require them to come back within a 6-month time frame to share their plans, as well as the time frame for any development to occur on Town Farm Road, Town Farm parcel.
Jamie, so the condition that we just discussed is only related to the town farm parcel. And if you go to condition number 2, which pretty much is just about hiring a qualified lighting consultant, are there any benchmarks or timeframes associated with the lighting plan? As you recall, it was something of major concern to the residents in the area.
So, again, as the administrative officer, serving in the role as the planning director, my understanding of this would be that when the hospital comes in for an exterior renovation or new project that affects the building or the parking lot, that triggers a zoning permit or building permit associated with that project, would be any implications to lighting on the campus related to that project. And we would look at that in its entirety.
So you're saying that would trigger the lighting plan for the campus as a whole rather than just that portion, or?
I would say there's some proportionality to it if they're dealing with we'll just use a reference, the northwest corner of the northwesternmost entrance. We wouldn't necessarily have expectations for them to look at lighting in the southwest corner, the former police station. But if they're working on the main entrance, they should look at a whole corridor associated with that main entrance.
Yeah, I think the reason for my question was that since lighting has been such a big and ongoing issue, is there any means by which we can be assured that when they begin the lighting process, it doesn't take 10 years to finalize the lighting plan?
I think we have the potential as, through the building permit process and the zoning process, to potentially condition an approval with benchmarks associated with improvements related to lighting. So again, that would potentially be done at the administrative level on smaller projects, but anything that comes back before you,
Yep.
the planning board would be reviewing the lighting plan.
I'd just like to be sure that it's on the record that that's been a concern of the board and obviously the neighbors all along. Anyone else?
Also be communicated to the council, whether formally or informally, and that could all be wrapped into the negotiations over the parcel.
It seems like that would be a good idea. We could- Is there agreement on the board that that should be part of the communication sent to the council? Okay. If there's nothing else, we have an amended motion before us that begins on page 2. Would someone like to make the motion?
I'll make that motion. As part of its submission, the South County Hospital has recognized in writing that their expansion plans are directly correlated to their ability to add parking on-site. The creation of additional parking through the demolition of the shed, approximately 40 new spaces, and the development of land anticipated to be acquired via the proposed land swap with the town, approximately 144 new parking spaces, are integral to the South County Health's development plans reflected in the IMP. The IMP contains several intertwined scenarios that cannot be untangled without jeopardizing the viability of the IMP. a number of future expansion plans contemplated in the IMP by the South County Hospital, as noted, required additional parking spaces to be brought online, and the scenarios to bring those required spaces online are reliant on approvals and transactions from outside entities that have not been obtained. To the extent that the expansion plans of the IMP rely on increased parking capacity obtained through a land swap with the town, alternative parking plans to support those projects will be required in the event the land swap does not occur as anticipated, either by reducing gross parking demand for other existing services, adding additional parking capacity elsewhere, and/or seeking an exemption to parking requirements pursuant to the zoning ordinance 603.1E. The findings of fact and conclusions of law herein stated are reliant on the fact that all necessary approvals associated with proposed future parking are obtainable. The South Kingston Planning Board hereby grants development plan approval to the South County Hospital for their institutional master plan, as required by the town's zoning ordinance, section 603C, for land located at Assessors Plat 32-4, Lot 32, with a physical address of 100 Kenyon Avenue, Wakefield, Rhode Island. Applicant owner, South County Hospital, INC. It should be noted that the IMP also contains proposed future improvements on a portion of Assessors Plat 64-1, Lot 1, owner, Town of South Kingstown, with a physical address of 509 Commodore Perry Highway. The approval is based upon a master plan entitled South County Health Institutional Master Plan 2022 for property located at Plat 64-1, Lot 122, zoning districts, government institutional and special flood hazard area overlay district, Kingston Road Special Management District. Dated 2022, prepared by VHB Precision Data Industries, LLC, and NEMD Architects. Findings of fact, A and B, and conditions 1 through 5,
As amended.
as amended.
We have a motion from Joe. Do we have a second? And I would ask that all of the text, beginning with regulatory considerations and especially the first paragraph under draft motion for consideration on page 2, be conveyed in its entirety to the council. Is everyone agreeing with that?
Yes, and one minor amendment, at the very bottom of the first paragraph motion, where it says, future parking are in fact are obtainable. Just get rid of that second R. My eye goes right to them. So.
Paul, can you be,
Yeah, right at the bottom of,
on page,
the very last sentence, on page 2, first main paragraph there of the motion. Parking are in fact are obtainable. I know you'll fix it.
We have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays?
No.
Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. This concludes our regular agenda items for the evening. The board will now adjourn and move into our work session. The first item on the work session is general work program discussion, which has a few items after that, but let's start with general work program discussion. And I'm hoping that, although Jamie has prepared a work program from, actually left over from 2022, and he has given us some other documents tonight, I would like to take this opportunity for board members to chat a little bit about what items or issues they feel that would be important for the board to tackle in the coming year.
Yes, so Madam Chair, the information that was handed out by your planning director was not intended to steer any discussion, but it was just a reminder of what you worked on last year. Also, I included one handout that kind of gave you the fiscal perspective of what is in our work program, what is in our capital budget. We do have a $30,000 grant coming in from Rhode Island Commerce that we will match with $20,000 for a total of $50,000 to start work on some regulatory and design review associated with the upper portion of Main Street as well as Old Tower Hill Road. So I just wanted you to be conscientious of where you were in 2021 and 2022 and where we're headed in the future.
Thanks, Jamie. I see you were very conscious with the font size so that it could fit all on one page.
We're trying to save paper and be fiscally responsible.
So I think it would be worthwhile. Obviously, there are a lot of things on this list that we have talked about, and I think perhaps a little bit more discussion about what folks think would be, not necessarily creating a priorities list, but just talking about things within these issues. For example, I know that 6-9 months ago, we talked about the need to make some modifications within our subdivision regulations relative to setbacks when we had a project with a multifamily design that was needed waivers and, you know, issues with setback from the road, and the board was a little bit frustrated that we didn't have more flexibility and would like to be able to have the ability to make modifications or based on a particular site plan. So I know that was one thing that came up. So again, I'd like folks to chime in on what they'd like to see relative to this list and more. Paul, you look like you're ready.
Yeah, so, you know, I've talked about this a couple of times, and I think in reference to that project that we always come back to, and I may get the language wrong here, but the yield calculation that was inclusive of a stormwater utility, and I know in a particular case it was an easement for the stormwater utility, but it seems to me that a stormwater utility keeps being presented as open space or a place for the kids to play, and I don't see it as any of the above. It's a stormwater collection utility, and I think it should be taken out of the yield calculation. Whether that's zoning or subdivision regs, I'm not clear, but.
Peter, Paul, just for clarification, you're referring to land suitable for development?
Mm-hmm.
Not yield?
Okay, thank you. Land suitable for development.
Correct.
And we're trying to be very careful about not naming names or streets or what have you, but again, just kind of keeping it general. And I think at times the board has been frustrated with their lack of ability to improve upon a design, both in an ordinary application and, of course, the comprehensive permits that we see more and more often.
The other thing, well, I've got a couple here, but one that I've been harping on ever since I was on the Affordable Housing Collaborative is zoning for multifamily housing. I know we don't have a lot of area in town zoned for multifamily housing. I'm not sure why it doesn't get looked at. I have some opinions about that, but I'll keep them to myself. And then things that I hear around town. Once people know that you're on the planning board, they like to complain. And it's either going to be traffic enforcement and or calming measures, some of the things that the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee's talked about, the speed tables, the bump outs, all the little things that you can do to slow people down on a road, where a speed limit sign or the, 1 in a million potential that a policeman might actually be there to catch you speeding. Whereas if you design a road that forces people to slow down, then they slow down. But that comes up from everyone. And the other one I keep hearing about is student rentals. And I know that we're making some progress on that with the municipal court and the rental registry. But what I keep hearing anecdotally is that there are an awful lot of properties in town with a lot of out-of-state cars parked on the lawn, where there seem to be clearly more than 3 unrelated people living there, just based on the license plates. Again, I think there's some progress in that regard, but it strikes me, and again, I think addressing that moves us toward more affordable housing for residents rather than students, so.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
To add to that comment about the student rentals, and it's one of the things that we're hearing a lot from the housing advocates is that the reason for, one of the reasons for lack of housing is that you have an aging population that is remaining in place in their, I've actually heard 8-bedroom houses. I don't know how many of those are around, but in houses with multiple bedrooms who then do not have a place to move to that they consider appropriate. And although we utilized one of the potential tools with the cottage zoning, it seems to me as though if we were to really think about looking at 55 and older, which used to be a technique that we used in the past, and thought about how we might design a project or design parameters for a project that would be interesting to people so that they would want to downsize. So, things like single-level buildings, pickleball court, things that people might be interested in if they were in that age group, walking paths and so on. And perhaps we could come up with some basic kind of either a design or an outline that would help and encourage potential applicants to follow that, and be sure that we do allow an over 55, because that might also help with the student housing if it were able to be enforced.
Madam Chair, if I might, I'm not so sure that we need to focus on age restrictions. It might be enough to focus on size. One thing I've read about consistently is the demise of the entry-level house, which could serve multiple purposes, both for younger families looking to start out and older people looking to downsize. So it may be the size of the construction more so than the age restriction.
Well, maybe we could do both, too. And again, the age restriction helping to limit the student rentals, and hopefully we'll come up with some means beyond a registration to try to manage the Airbnbs and, all of that. Other thoughts? Susan?
I have a question. I was interested in what you just said, Brian. What kind of mechanism could we have to encourage more smaller entry-size houses?
We've already started talking about some of it, increasing development density on a property with X value that becomes less expensive for people to buy in or rent in by having multiple smaller dwellings in that space.
But we just had a development with some pretty small houses on it, and they're not affordable for, they're not single level, they're not affordable, but they are a small footprint. I don't mean affordable, big capital A affordable, but affordable as in reasonably priced. How could we encourage that entry-level housing which would also be affordable.
And you mean affordable in terms of like market rate that's affordable, right? Not
Small A
deed
affordable,
restricted.
no, small A affordable that,
Madam Chair, again, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director. We talked just a little bit at the staff level, and staff being Jay, Brian, and I, about this aspect. And sometimes the solution isn't just offering more density, because the density in the end is driven by market conditions. I think you've seen that, if you give a developer 20 lots, X number are going to be affordable, and then the rest are going to be driven by market conditions. And again, it may be a question, working with legal, that is there an opportunity to have a tiered approach, that you're offered a certain density when you provide a certain amount of percentage of affordable units. You're allowed even a higher density if you provide more affordable units, and so on. Again, whether Rhode Island's enabling legislation allows you to tier that may be a unique opportunity for South Kingstown to look at that. The key is your land values are high for raw material, and whether you have a 3-bedroom home or a 2-bedroom home, and Peter could, I want to see him nod after I say this, is that you still need a driveway. That driveway costs the same whether you have 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. You still, if there's a garage, typically the garage is the same size whether you have a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom. You still have 2.5 baths. You still have a kitchen. So it's not necessarily the bedroom count. There's a buy-in level even for a 1-bedroom house. And it'd be nice if we had the resources to maybe evaluate the cost to build a 1-bedroom home in town, the cost to build a 2-bedroom, the cost to build a 3-bedroom, and how that affects a developer, and where is a price point, and I'm using price point in the term of density, where a developer can come in and perhaps offer 50% affordable if they get a certain density they need to carry the cost to develop that parcel. I don't have the number. I've been searching for it for 34 years. If everybody had that magic number, they'd probably be doing it, but I think it's worth the exercise to see whether it's even potentially viable in town, given the fact that typically a 1-acre lot in town is over $250,000.
So I'm just thinking, again, and we've talked about duplexes, fourplexes, multiplexes, and I think, because, again, I'm going to point at Peter and say, I think I've heard him say several times, building smaller isn't necessarily cheaper.
Correct.
Because of all those factors. You've got to buy the land, you're going to put one house on it, you've got to put in a foundation. There's all that site work that has to be done. Whereas you take that same site and you allow a fourplex on it, and, one of those 4 is affordable. Or, again, more apartments, and I think it just comes down to that. Where is the multifamily zoning in town? And it's doesn't exist.
Sorry, Peter, we
You're gonna
wouldn't be
save
able to hear you.
You're going to save on the land cost. I think the issue becomes, like you mentioned, square foot. Smaller houses per square foot are going to be more expensive. The cheap spaces are the big, huge great rooms that nobody wants to see, or more bedrooms, or that is the cheapest space in the whole entire house. Bathrooms, bedrooms, and then, like you said, if it's a septic system or sewer you're connecting, whether it's 5 bedrooms or 1 bedroom, the sewer connection is similar. So I think that's the strive. I mean, we've painted ourselves into a predicament of creating an amazing environment for where people want to live, and that's what's driving the cost. Either got to make it a crappier place or figure out a way to make it cheaper. I mean,
And of course,
I
I
know
think,
that's not a
yeah.
reality, but I mean,
well, that's the thing, is I don't think people understand that the planning board and the town as a whole, we do not control real estate values, and it seems like people think that we do.
how many times have we each been yelled at? Why are houses so expensive in this town, and what are you doing about it?
Right.
But
And,
But I think it's also, to Susan's point, it's a trade-off. Are you willing, to Paul's point, and Joe's talked about it before, if you had a quarter-acre lot and you could fit one single-family home, and that single-family home had a sales price of $649,000 or $699, would you be willing to allow a developer to do a triplex where one of the units was affordable? It's going to be different than the house to the right, left, and behind it.
But with a
But
triplex,
that's
do
something
we
you
need-
have to evaluate.
But with a triplex, one wouldn't even need to be affordable. We haven't kicked into that yet, right?
If you, so in your single, so if you had a zone where you only allowed single family or a single family with an accessory, what you can explore is allowing a triplex to be built so long as you made one of the 3 units affordable.
Okay, so maybe I need I need to understand that I thought duplexes at least were allowed by right, like what just happened on that other street in Peacedale.
I'll turn to my permit expert, Jay, but in certain scenarios, they are by right, not in all scenarios. Jay?
Right, they're allowed by right in the lower zoning districts, R10, R20. Once you get above that, they're not allowed. The concept of multiple units on one lot is not appropriate on R40, R80, R200 in this town. You'd have to be in an R10 or a R20 for the duplex to be allowable. And I think what Jamie is saying now is if we were to allow a triplex that otherwise is not allowed today, by right, so long as the developer provides an affordable unit, that would be an incentive, an opportunity to try to increase.
It's not appropriate, it's not the right word, it's just currently not allowed.
Correct.
And so the other thing that is part of the whole density conversation is one of capacity in terms of OWTS, open space, land suitable for development. And I think also what comes up often, both from the board's perspective and the public perspective, is community character. And it's not necessarily well-defined, wondering if we can do a better job of defining it and better integrating it into our comprehensive plan, appropriate ordinances, and so on.
And that's a conversation that I think at least some of us have looked at. You know, the idea that a developer could design something that fits in the context, the local vernacular, you know, like, rather than picking a design. I was out on Block Island last week, and there was a house, a brand-new house going up, that was so completely out of place. It was clearly nicely designed, and there were places where it might work. On Block Island, it just looked completely out of place, and I thought, no architect worth his salt would have looked at that site and said, this is the house for this location. Somebody picked it out of a catalog and said, this has the number of bedrooms, and it has a balcony in every bedroom, and this is what I want, even though it's wrong for the location. And so that sort of having a process where we can get, and I think we talked about pre-approved designs, you know, if you come through with these things, we can.
And Paul, you touched upon a point that I was about to bring up. Some communities around the country, when they look at the incentive side of affordable, there's an expedited permitting process. We'll take the triplex. You could probably, in this community, come up with 3 designs for a triplex that would match the majority of the vernacular in town. And you could potentially have Model A, B, and C, and if a developer picked Model A, that they could move forward in an expeditious manner. The difficulty is, and this isn't unique to South Kingstown, when you're in a neighborhood with traditional single-family development, and all of you sit on this board, and in the last 2 years that I've been here, you have had multiple occasions when you have a single-family neighborhood, and just the introduction of another single-family house in a single-family neighborhood is not always viewed as acceptable, So again, you have to be prepared for the fact that there would potentially be pushback if you allowed increased density like a triplex in a traditional single-family neighborhood.
Push back on everything.
Yeah, but you know, a lot of it comes down to design, and I think Paul was the one who said, after a particular subdivision had been reviewed, why can't we have the applicant, whether they're going to build duplexes or whatever, look at the surrounding neighborhood, have the landscape architect look at the surrounding neighborhood and design something that is similar in nature to the surrounding neighborhoods, but fits the criteria that we're looking for. I mean, it's not.
And when you look, if you drive up and down the streets in town, it's a hodgepodge. It's just that they're older homes, the trees have grown up, there's landscaping, there's nice lawns, there are, lawn chairs out there. But the houses, other than being of a similar size, lots of different forms, and the form really comes with the porches and some of the details and the, I think there's a lot that could be done to build something new that doesn't necessarily look like it dropped down from outer space, as a lot of new projects seem to.
But I'd also like to add, when's the last time we saw a house going up in town that didn't have a two-car garage? And if you're talking about a triplex, how many cars are now going to fit on that quarter-acre lot? So I could understand why the neighbors will lose their minds when they have a single-family neighborhood and now they have a large building and then a whole lot of pavement going in next door. So to fit, 6 cars and a 3-family house on a single house lot, we're inviting people to come in here and yell at us. So how do we get around that? It's the parking. It's paving a gigantic portion of the property to accommodate cars, or everyone wants to build two-car garages for every unit. And I think that's where we're getting into these really big buildings.
And it's also using or having the mindset going in of many applicants that the natural features of the site are an impediment instead of something to be utilized. Let's go in, cut all the trees down, flatten all the, I know that the town of Charlestown just recently adopted a newer and better version of, I guess it's something similar to FDRP, but they called it conservation subdivision design. I think that would be something that would be of great interest to potential homeowners and developers as well, and it's something that we should look at. Because Susan's right, everything that comes in seems to, everyone wants to build these big houses, and when we look at some of the historic buildings, you think about adjacent to the mills in Peacedale, and pretty small houses. How can we inspire building those kinds of houses?
No, I think you can develop a few models if that's what you wanted to do over a specific time period. To Paul's point, Susan's point, if it will be different potentially than the neighborhood it's being proposed in, and there will potentially be pushback. But if you don't try, your R40s, your R60s, your R80s, and the 200s will continue to be developed as larger single-family homes because you need to carry the cost to purchase that acre or more. And, if you're a developer, you're not going to buy a lot in an R200 zone and in all likelihood put a 1,200 square foot home with no garage. You're going to build 36 to 4,000 square feet, and it's going to go on the market for 1.6 to 1.9.
And it does come down to choice. I mean, people have to be allowed to buy an R80, R200, and they shouldn't be stigmatized for that, which
Yeah,
seems to
I'm
be,
not
no, I don't mean from you, but.
Connecticut had some legislation where they were basically looking at not allowing single-family homes in any zone, so that if you wanted to build a home on 20 acres, you wouldn't be allowed to. You would have to build 2 homes on that 20 acres.
And that came up in the last legislative session, primarily from very urban folks. And again, we have a varied landscape in the state. We have urban, suburban, and rural parts of the state, and we are very lucky to have what we have, and so we have to be very careful about how we develop and how it might impact especially our non-renewable natural resources.
And our department is not discussing or looking into the future where we would recommend mandating multi-household versus the ability to do a single house on a single lot. That is not what a good majority of South Kingstown is.
Absolutely
But
not.
I think there are potential opportunities to support affordable housing, to potentially increase the density in the right setting, in the right manner, in the right style.
Have the choice.
Jamie, so, I don't always want to be the downer here, but we're talking about adding more rules and regulations and then also saying we want to make them cheaper. One doesn't come with the other. Like, if you're requiring someone to hire a landscape architect to develop this piece of property, I'm assuming it's $10,000. I don't know. But the developer's not going to take it out of his end. He's just going to add it to the end sales. So we can add this stuff, but it's going to, I think we're trying to solve lots of problems and we can't. So we have to pick and choose what the problems we want to solve and then just own it. We're not going to make everybody happy. There's going to be pissed off people. People that don't like the new house in the neighborhood, they're going to be pissed off. The people that can't afford to live here, they're going to be pissed off. Somebody's going to be pissed off. That's the problem with wearing the crown and sitting at the table.
I think the idea of having somebody at least look at the neighborhood, someone other than, I mean, I just see a lot of houses that, and again, I keep saying this because I can't think of a better way to say it, that just have the appearance of being chosen from a catalog rather than looking at the surroundings and saying, what would work here? I mean, I realize everybody wants to maximize their return. I think it's still possible without spending $10,000 on initial architecture and landscaping fees to look and then go back to the catalog and say, what fits here versus what's easiest for me to build?
Most of the developers that come here come from one drafts company in the state. It's because he has books. So everyone can sit there and go, I'll pick that house, that house, that house. Those plans are insanely cheap compared to everything else. I mean, a set of plans that the company does is $5,000. To hire a quality architect, it's $50,000. That's why they pick that.
So, yeah, so maybe, even though you said more rules and regulations, maybe we need our own book that people can choose from.
Totally.
Customized
someone's gotta
for
pay for that,
South
right?
Kingstown.
I mean,
Right, but
The
it
town
would be
or somebody.
worthwhile,
Yeah.
right?
And again, that discussion has been held in California, it's been held in Washington, it's been held in Oregon, and those communities who are looking to address some of the issues are saying, if you want affordable housing, you can all sit around the table and kind of know what's appropriate and what will fit. So instead of having 20 different people try and design 20 different things that you're going to like or not like, let's hire one person to potentially do 3 or 4 model homes that someone can pick from. But the incentive to pick that is typically in those communities a slightly more efficient permitting process.
And I don't want to change the subject, but I do want to make sure we get to a redo of the landscape regulations, as everyone has heard me say. But, you know, when Peter just mentioned the landscape architect, at the TRC yesterday, there was a reuse project that came up. It was, I believe, allowed by right. It was like, you know, you need a row of arborvitae, you need some plantings in the front. I don't think you should have to hire a landscape architect for something like that when it's an existing use. And I mean, it's really not that difficult. There are plenty of landscape designers out there who are not landscape architects, who aren't going to charge $10,000 or whatever it is. I mean,
And even if we
You
gave
know,
them choices, even if, like the book you're talking about, if
Yeah.
they had the book to say, this would be appropriate here, pick 3 from here, 3 from here, and call it a day.
So can
key is
can I add my 2 cents in before we move on then? I think one of the worst things that South Kingstown has ever done is dangle the temptation of greater density to developers, and they always go for the greater density, and you end up with a building covering the lot. If there's any space around that, it's a retention pond, and you're ruining the character of South Kingstown by letting houses cover lots with no outdoor space for water to run back into the ground. And who really wants to have a 3-story mountain put in next to their house so you can live in the shade of it? I mean, that's changing this town immensely. People work hard to live in this town. Okay, it's an expensive town to live in, but we like it that way. And so when we're always going, oh no, we've got to put in greater density, here, greater density, I think we're ruining the town with that. And over the last 25 years I've lived here, that's what I've seen happen. Yup, density is the great advantage for the developer, not for the town.
Those of us that can afford to own a home here might like it that way. But, I mean, I think clearly when we talk about affordable housing, there are people that are from here or work here that can't live here, or kids that grew up
That
here.
doesn't mean you have to put a mountain next to somebody who's happily owned their home for 35 years.
You've got to do something, and I think, there's a core area. I don't think we're talking about building 5-story multiplex housing in Perryville. Although, oddly enough, there is the old Perryville Inn, which is a very large multi-family building that's very attractive. And I think there are ways.
You're talking about Singer's, the Post House?
Is that what it is? Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful.
Called the Post House, yeah.
I don't know how many apartments are in it. It's got to be at least 4.
6 apartments, I believe.
So I think, there are ways to do it. And again, in the core area, there are places. I mean, I live in the shadow of the house next door, and it's the neighborhood that I bought into because I like being on High Street.
Okay, so you bought into it. The mountain was already there. If I owned a home in town and the town allowed a developer to put a 3-story house next to mine, and I now live in the shade of that house, I'd find that really unfair.
I guess the question is, how close is it, and where are you, and what's its zone? I just think that it's a big town, and there are ways to look at where we can allow this sort of thing. And I like the idea of coming up with a design catalog and saying, and if you pick this design, here are the incentives for you.
One of the things that we've talked about and we've seen a little bit is the idea that Paul mentioned in the village centers or in the core, where you have perhaps a 1-story commercial, and then you add on and have residential above it. That's one way to integrate something where you already have multi-level residences. But Robin also, I think, is right in that people, the biggest investment of their lives is in their property, and they work hard and they save their money so that they can buy a property, and if they want to, if the town has an area zoned as R40 and it's single-family homes and they want to live there, they should be able to do that, again, without being stigmatized, and it shouldn't be something considered bad. And even more so for R80, R200, that's part of the fabric. So I feel as though because of the current focus on housing, there seems to be, and believe me, I have heard it personally from folks around the state, a lot of finger pointing at those communities that allow 5-acre zoning. Like, how dare you? Really, this is what I've heard. So I think we need to be really considerate about what makes South Kingstown and many communities within South County so desirable. We have open space, we have trees, we don't cut them down, we don't turn it into Warwick, and we don't want to turn into Warwick. So we have to be really careful about how we approach all these things and take all of these things into consideration.
We need to keep density a consideration for the reasons you say. Let's face it, it's always going to come down to, I'm not making enough money, so you have to let me do this. I get that, I guess. But you can't cover the ground with the building. You have to leave some ground around it, which means the size of the building. If you're going to up the density down the size of the building, you can't have it both ways.
So that's a very good point, because lot coverage is not something that we talk about a lot. And how does lot coverage relate to different types of designs within various zoning districts? I think that's really important for the look.
Madam Chair,
ahead.
this looks, seems to me an opportune time to chime in on behalf of the Economic Development Committee that I represent, that has been beating the drum for 5 or more years now about mixed-use, multi-story development in the commercial highway district downtown. And you don't have the land coverage argument there because it's already 80 to 90% paved or built on. I know that Jamie has managed to cobble together some money for some outside consulting support in this. This can be done either really well or really badly. I've had to throttle back some members of the Economic Development Committee who have basically just said, let property owners build whatever they want, they'll do what's right for the town. And all I can envision is standing at the top of the hill at Route 1 and looking down that hill into a giant concrete canyon. But I do understand that it potentially, if done right, if done in with a look back towards Old Main Street, could be done well, could bring back or revitalize the center of town by having people there all day, living there as well as working there. So I think that's something to also think about. And from the affordable housing perspective, and also the Economic Development Committee's perspective, we need people living in town who can live here and work some of the entry-level jobs. Right now, the Economic Development Committee members are complaining about not being able to find the people to ring their cash registers, people to sell the coffee, people to run the front end of the business because they can't afford to live here and you can't afford the gas to commute here for a job at that level.
I would say this should be a huge priority. I mean, we met with town council and everyone years ago. There are property owners that have money that want to do this today. And we've kicked this thing down the road for 5 years. Soon,
Not us, but-
soon, big businesses will buy these people out and they don't give a shit. But like I know Jabers does and the liquor store on the corner, these people all care about but once they sell this off and CVS buys more or whoever, they don't give a shit. There'll be concrete buildings 40 feet high, whatever. So, I mean, we just got to move on this.
Right, I mean, I've been beating that drum for more than 5 years, and I know that some of the newer members haven't seen the different neighborhood scenarios and development scenarios that Will Green's landscape architecture class came up with for that area as a whole, because right now, it's everything that we don't want it to be. And I think Brian at one point coined the term commerce before community when that was, typical 1970s strip development. It's overlit, it's overpaved, there are very little vegetation, you've got heat island effect. So that is an area that could be such a good model for other communities, and it could really help us in so many ways.
I just, Madam Chair, it's interesting discussion because there was just an email from the CNU Journal. I'm just going to show you a couple of the pictures from this development, which is in the southern portion of.
Are we like talking about where Staples is? What are you folks talking?
Yeah, that from
And they're going to sell that land for development?
Route 1 to the,
Starbucks?
yes.
Dale Carlisle?
Yeah, because it's commercial highway, which is
Yeah, it's
really anything
it's
goes.
ugly.
And
But are those stores going to sell that land for development? Is that what you're talking about?
There are people that want to develop, but they can't. They need higher height restrictions so they can get more volume there, so they can put commercial downstairs and multifamily upstairs.
And the idea with that is that you would require them to add green space, appropriate lighting, more
Sure.
pedestrian amenities.
Sure, no, it could be beautiful, but are you saying that Staples and Shaw's are ready to sell that property? No. So where are you putting it?
Like,
So-
all the way up, all the other buildings, like the Economic Development Committee went and talked to a bunch of businesses
did.
on on that strip, they came and presented to us, and they said, we're willing to spend real money to do this. I know, I forget her name, but the woman that owns the liquor store in the corner there, Dale Collier? Costanza, she wants to do that whole thing, she has a huge, beautiful plan, but she can't do it with the way the requirements are now.
So we would need to create some kind of an overlay district that had the flexibility, the built-in flexibility that would allow just in this area or district or whatever we wanted to call it, these types of changes. And of course, it would come with multiple benefits. It wouldn't just,
No, that's ideal. Who likes driving past that area? That's
Madam
so not my town.
We did apply for $125,000 from Commerce that we were gonna match with 25 for a total of 150. We received 30 versus 125. We're still, as a department, intending to match that with 20. So hopefully in the next month or so, we will have $50,000 available to begin exploring an RFQ and get proposals out to bring an appropriate consultant on to start to look at that.
and you know, there are a lot of examples of this kind of work that consultants have, or, you know, designers have done over the years, whereby they transform an area, and it really just starts with one or two property owners who are willing to start the process, and then they act as a catalyst for the others.
You know, the traffic there is already, we never come into town. Trying to drive through town's ridiculous. You put that kind of development on that corner, it's gonna be a nightmare. That road doesn't handle the traffic flow it has now.
Yeah, I mean, you think about areas of, say, Wickford Village or Newport, where you have, you know, commercial and residential, you have streetlights, you have sidewalks, you have green space, and you have restaurants, and you have, it revitalizes the area as a whole.
I have a couple items.
Go ahead.
So there's a couple things, and I think they've been brought up at past years. And a lot of this stuff is intertwined, and some of it is gonna, I think, echo what we just heard. But first, West Kingston. So I think, you know, I think West Kingston is an area that has a lot more potential than it's currently being utilized. You got the transportation there, you got the URI around the corner, you have sewers, and I still would like to see some type of us to evaluate that and maybe make some zoning changes that would allow that to become more of a cultural, artsy, as well as a business, so maybe some multi-use there where, and as well as housing. So West Kingston, the zoning, and looking at that area and what we could possibly allow. The zoning, and this kind of echoes the conversation we just had, but following Paul, zoning that would allow multifamily and residentially zoned areas with where there's appropriate infrastructure. So there's not many rentals in South Kingstown, or I don't believe there's many rentals in South Kingstown. Rentals are, the apartment buildings are allowed in commercial, and they're allowed in the multifamily. And I think that the zoning is 5,000 for the first unit and 1,200 for each additional unit. So if you look at a half-acre lot, you can have up to like 12 units. Then on the other side, we got the R10 and the R20, where you could have one unit, and if it used to be, if you wanted to have a duplex, you had to have 1.5 times the size. We might have got rid of that. So talking about missing middle, there's a missing middle there from my perspective in the R10 and the R20, somewhere between 1 unit and 12 units. So maybe the R10 and the R20, something allowing, where it's appropriate, you know, a 4-unit or a 6-unit. We'd have to, like I said, I think there's a real big missing middle there. Also, looking at, and I know Brian has the Affordable Housing Commission looking at this, but looking at changes to the inclusionary zoning regs to make it more attractive to builders than the comprehensive permit process that would achieve the same or even more units. So we see the builders using the comprehensive permit, and I know I feel like we don't have a lot of control over that once they go that process. And you hear the builders complain about the nuances of the comprehensive permit and that it doesn't serve the right, and I think we all feel there could be some improvement there. But we can't change the comprehensive permit, but what we can do is change our own inclusionary zoning, that becomes the choice. And I think there's areas in there where it's possible a win-win, where we could perhaps make it more attractive to the developer and maybe end up with the same or not more affordable units. Maybe if the developer was able to build affordable units that weren't necessarily the same size as the market rate or smaller than the market rate, maybe we can get more units than, if the developer, instead of have to building another house that's worth $1 million but selling it $200,000, if he could build a couple small units. So I think there's a possibility there. Brian has the Affordable Housing Commission looking at that, but instead of them just looking at it and presenting ideas to us, which we may or may not adopt, I think it would be good if we engaged them early on, maybe gave them some direction, some encouragement, tell them what would, kind of gave them some direction. So I'd like to see the board do that with the Affordable Housing Commission. And then maybe some changes in the zoning which would limit density incentives in areas that we have determined in the town are overbuilt. So when a builder uses a comprehensive permit, I think we feel pressure to accept it. In some cases, a density, in the comprehensive permit, it could be 100% increase, 200% increase. In some cases, that's appropriate, but we've seen other areas, like the Matunic, as an example, where the density increase, I think, we all have a lot of concerns about. So maybe there's something in the zoning that would give us a little more leverage to limit the density incentives when somebody's going by that comprehensive permit. So those are the things I would like to see.
Thanks, Joe. That's great. The last thing that you mentioned, developing our own standard or regulation for carrying capacity in environmentally sensitive areas, because that's exactly what happened in Matunic, and we feel very helpless. And you're right, if we could find a way to get applicants interested in a revised inclusionary zoning ordinance that gave us 25% or more, instead of them throwing the zoning ordinance out the window, going to the comp permit, and then us only getting 25% when they could ask for double or triple the density. I mean, that's, I think we all feel pretty helpless when that happens, so.
So again, Brian has them working on that. It would be good for us to engage them, give them direction, encouragement, let them know that it's worth it for them to spend the time,
Yeah.
because we really are going to consider it when it comes back this way.
I mean, there is a saying with the developers that say the developers develop the plan that the town creates. They can't do this without the rules and regulations that we create. If we create the rules and regulations we want, they develop to those rules and regulations. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. That's exactly.
Yeah, we have to always kind of work backwards. What do we want the outcome to be? And then let's work our way backwards to end up with that. Yeah.
So I think one of the strategies for making houses more affordable is to build more. And I don't see that that's being an effective way of reducing the price of houses. And I think we're not spending any energy looking on the buildings that we already have and how they're being used. And so instead of increasing density and thereby potentially lowering the cost of units, which I think doesn't work because we've seen projects come with very expensive, dense houses, I think our town manager might be interested. I've heard the town council talk about some way to start reining in the rental, the seasonal rental, the short-term vacation rentals, the part-year rentals, which I think is sucking all of the regular year-round rentals out of the market in town. So instead of building more and more, and it's still more of those are going to seasonal rentals, I would be much happier to start looking at some way to get that under control and potentially open up more housing units to year-round families. That'd be much more valuable to me than building more units in town.
And how about, I know we've touched on this a little bit, creating incentives to make it easier to do a redevelopment. Take a large house that you then want to put apartments in. And again, it has to be done correctly so you don't have 10 cars all over the lawn. But encouraging redevelopment. You know, is there a way to do this? What, you know, where has it been done successfully? What can we learn from other places? I have a couple of other things. One is training for planning board. With legislation that was passed last session, there is an increase for training for planning and zoning boards, and I think HDCs as well. But in chatting with Jamie about a lot of the things that were discussed tonight and helping us to manage that, it seems to me that while statewide planning is going to continue to offer training, it's pretty, I don't want to say standardized, but it kind of is. It's making better land use decisions, and not that there's anything, it's great, it's really, especially for folks that are new to planning boards, but if we could find a way to have somebody come in, kind of like what Brian did with the HDC camp, where, not that we would get people from the West Coast or anything, but having you know, a planner, designer come in and talk about what our options might be, and just help us, again, to give us some customized training with, you know, all of the problems and all the issues that we've just discussed tonight. I think that would be really useful.
Similar to your fellow who came in about permeable pavers.
Yes, but on a, of course, more broad.
Stormwater and affordable housing. Those are the two things I'd like to be schooled in.
So Jamie, I don't know if you think that might be possible, but.
And thank you, Maria. We did talk about it. I will attempt to add a line item in the planning department's budget for, it may be in the commission's budget for training. Again, we do have that mandate from the state, so there will potentially be a cost for that. And if we can gear up for that, I think what Maria and I touched upon is, you know, there are a lot of talented people within a 2-hour drive of South Kingstown. They don't always need to be from the immediate area, but there are some good planners and designers from the Boston area, as well as Providence, as well as Hartford in Connecticut, that potentially may, if we had a small stipend available to them, some will come at no stipend other than dinner, just to have a general discussion with you on topics, to give you a national. One of my mentors is Dwight Muriam, who works for Robinson & Cole, and Dwight is a well-known New England land use attorney, former planner, educated at Chapel Hill in North Carolina, and he's also nationally known as one of the leading land use attorneys who has a wealth of 40-plus years experience on, I want to say, most topics. We just utilized him in another municipality to do accessory dwelling units, and he did that pro bono. So there are individuals out there that, for a small stipend, or if we can provide dinner for them, may be willing to come out here and talk to you for an evening or a Saturday morning in a very casual setting.
I just want to mention, you know, I was also out in Nantucket a couple of weeks ago. It was a beautiful fall day.
You want road trips now?
70 degrees, biking around Nantucket in late October was not bad. Cumberland Farms, the liquor store, I mean, once you get out of old historic town and you're out on the side road heading out toward, what's the place with the rose cottages, Sconset, but Cumberland Farms, it says Cumberland Farms in a size 6 font. you know, I don't think anybody has trouble finding it. All the parking's in the back, away from the street, the Cumberland Farms, the liquor store, the deli, the coffee shop, shingle-style buildings, very pretty, Cumberland Farms. And I just thought, okay, it can be done. I mean, clearly, you know, they found a way to make it happen.
You still allow internally illuminated signs in your business districts.
Yeah, where's that on our list?
Exactly.
What?
We might have a store on Main Street that makes me crazy. Do we have that on our work list? Can we address that?
For internally illuminated signs?
So we don't look like Las Vegas down on our historic Main Street?
That would be a simple text amendment. That would be adding the language that internally illuminated signs are not allowed, only externally illuminated signs are allowed.
But remember, existing signs
Right.
will become
Yeah.
non-conforming.
But I mean,
No.
you know,
The one sign that I cannot get out of my head was on the original master plan for the hospital, the Marchand Pavilion. You're going to see that from Route 1.
Route 1.
Intentionally.
Yep.
So can we just like do that and then feel really good about that?
You could, if that's something the planning board would like staff to undertake, we propose an amendment on your behalf.
Do you have any other little nuggets we can make ourselves really feel good about? Like little Christmas gifts? Anything else that easy we can do?
That-
Yeah.
That's the, you know, in the discussion I've heard from you over the last 2 years, to me, that's one of the lowest hanging items, you know, if you use the terminology, lowest hanging fruit.
We're going to get an
That's literally a
application.
sentence or two.
We're going to get a crazy application and have no power over it.
Okay, how about lighting, right? When you drive by South County Commons, it looks like Santa's palace or something. It's so much lighting there. That's so ugly.
There's a car place up on Route 1.
So
Car places are really
you
abusive
have-
of it.
Place in Route 1 is like, the sun is set.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the discussion, and Maria's just watching me smile. You do have lighting regulations with regards to night sky compliant. I think it takes talent and understanding on your staff, which I hope you have faith in the three of the planning board staff members who are sitting here, that we're much more conscientious from a design perspective. Just because something is night sky compliant doesn't mean it's appropriate lighting. You can get away with hot spots of 7 and low spots of 0.5 in a parking lot scenario for retail. Lighting consultants and businesses like 14 to 20 for hot spots with nothing less than 6. So it's an understanding to use your own regulations and your own staff to make sure the regulations you already have are interpreted well, and that interpretation is articulated to the developers, so you do get toned down lighting.
At one point, we had a fellow named Joe Holquist who was on the planning board. He was an electrical engineer, and he could read these plans very easily, and he said, you know, it really would not be difficult to tweak your ordinance so that the lighting would be much more appropriate.
We can take a quick look at that, but again, the internally illuminated signs is a sentence or two.
And I just want to add a couple of other things to what I said earlier, landscape regulations, proper buffers, preventing people from limbing up buffers, and then no recourse. And landscaping also has a part in parking lots, and that's also something that we should talk about when we're talking about landscaping. There's a lot of, I mean, our landscaping regs, I don't think have been modified since the 80s, and the drawings are horrible, and there's so much we could do. I'd be willing to spend whatever time is needed helping, volunteering to work on that. And it has a lot to do with, when we talk about community character, good landscaping. I mean, good landscaping isn't going to change a really bad design, but it can certainly enhance a mediocre one or a good one for that matter. And it's important for infiltration and stormwater management, and all these things go hand in hand. And remember that I did bring to one of our work sessions the LID self-assessment from Lorraine Joubert who's on the Conservation Commission, and this is what she does at the university, and I think it's something that we should do or work with them to have them do that for us. Because, as we all know, stormwater is a huge issue, and it doesn't always go away if not properly designed and maintained post-construction. And then the only other thing I have is, I've talked to Jamie a couple of times in the last couple of years about creating a library of different kinds of planning and design books that board members could check out from the office, and that way we could look at them and be inspired and learn quite a lot. The National APA has a list of the 100 best planning books going back to, I don't know, 1920s or something, but I think between everybody, there are a lot of books that we have read that we could share, that could be acquired and shared, and I think would be really helpful, because there's nothing like looking at a good design and say, wait a minute, I think we could do that here.
And Madam Chair, to that point, we did establish a budget line item last year for that purpose.
Excellent. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking in terms of buffers, can't the town add a little buffer outside of DEM's buffer for, we've had some development where, what is it, less than an acre wetland gets very little buffer. Couldn't South Kingstown add on to that buffer? And why not?
Because the state law was, due to state law and the regs that were just promulgated and effective July 1st of this year, the DEM and the CRMC now have total jurisdictional authority with respect to wetland buffers and setbacks. The regs do contain a process whereby towns can weigh in or petition the agencies to alter them, but it's not necessarily project by project, and the planning board wouldn't have direct purview. It would have to be the town, I believe, acting through the council, petitioning the agencies to, change the buffer for a certain.
Well, CRMC's going to get a lot of restructuring right now, right? They're a mess.
Yeah, I think that rule was it would have to be, you could petition for a certain type of wetland, like a forested a coniferous forested wetland, and if that petition was accepted, it would apply statewide, I think.
Statewide, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just your own little project, which makes it somewhat daunting.
So I thought it was the town, each town could,
There's,
Okay, yeah.
there's two things being discussed on the
We've sat
table
through
right
so
here.
many webinars on this.
Right. So, and I don't even know if I can keep it straight. But the town is able, so the DEM wetland regs have specific standards based on the characteristic and the classification of the water body that is being considered. So whether it's a forested wetland in South County or it's a ASSF in Burrillville, they would apply different standards based on those characteristics. Now, if the town said, identified a stream in Wakefield, let's say, and said, you know what, that deserves a higher classification. That is not it's not a B, it's actually an A. The town would petition DEM, but the town would have to undertake a professional study to show what the traits and what the benefits of that stream has to support a higher classification. So you'd actually have to go and do a research study and prove that, yes, this deserves a higher classification. That's simply on the regulation component. The other part that was touched on was weighing in on applications themselves. And the town has the ability of being a commenter on an application that DEM is reviewing. Not that they can steer it towards town regulations, but the town can advise or put forward their opinion on something to DEM for them to consider as part of the application process. Not much different than what you guys do here in taking public comment. But there's two different, those are two different actions on two different topics. So the first one having to do with the regulation is, it's a tough road to hoe. I mean, you're going to have to go in and hire professionals and come up with this justification for this one change. And then potentially, based on that, they could change the regs statewide based on those findings, but it's a much taller order.
And when they did the map, I think they continued in the final version to use A, B, and C, as A being the most highly important protected, and then lesser, and B and C. And South Kingstown is partially A and partially B, which is a little bit,
Right, because I think B is also Oneyville or something like that.
That's C, the urban.
no, C is like,
There is some strange overlap, though. If you were to look at what some of these other B areas are, that's like, clearly it's not the same.
Believe me, I was there for the whole thing. I don't ever want to do it again.
anything else that's either on this list or anyone's ideas? Now is the time, because I think these kind of discussions are really useful.
Yeah, I'm really happy we're able to talk about some of these things tonight. And I know that I've mentioned this before, but we've talked about a historic overlay over Main Street, historic Main Street, and potentially Peacedale Village to protect them from maybe hasty demolition or inappropriate development. We talked about a partnership with the Historic District Commission to do an overlay, at least a demolition delay, and we never really, I think, moved on any of that. And, you know, I think that was my thing 2 years ago, because I was worried that we would get an application for a terrible thing that we would have no power to control. So I would like to revisit protecting our historic Main Street, or maybe Peacedale Village, or maybe identify some other locations in town with an overlay for our protecting our historic resources.
And I know that we have funds that are set aside for Main Street, and Jamie has been working with a consultant, not necessarily what you're talking about, but it's kind of part and parcel of the same thing. Revitalization efforts for Main Street. And I know that Grow Smart Rhode Island is working on to develop a pilot plan whereby we would have a statewide Main Street organization similar to other states, and there's a national organization which some communities have joined. I think Pawtucket is one of them. I don't know who else has joined, but it really gives you a lot of assistance and benefits for making your Main Street continue to thrive. And it's a really excellent program.
Can I ask about something as an aside? We talked about Saugatucket Park like a year ago. Is that moving along as the Olmsted redesign? And it was tied to the 300th, but then I haven't heard about it for a year. Is that kind of doing its thing?
Parks and Leisure do have funds available for some improvements there. I can check and report back to you on timelines for that.
Yeah, because they had DEM money when COVID began, and I don't know if they have used any, I know
They haven't, I can check on the status of that project for you.
and that was such a wonderful project because it was wrapped up in Main Street.
And down at the Contemporary Theater, we had that great event.
Exactly, yes.
I'm just curious.
I haven't heard anything, so if anyone knows anything, but yes, Jamie, if you could research that, that would be appreciated. Anything else that we haven't, pretty thorough this evening on work problem. Jamie, do you want to talk about CIP and?
On agenda items C, 2, and 3, I'll just talk briefly on those. November 14th is our deadline as a department to put our capital improvement program together. We had requests of $300,000 over a 5-year period. it has seemed that every year that gets pushed back a little bit. We were in line for $75,000 this year for planning studies. It appears that that will move forward as between a $30,000 and $40,000 amount. In addition to that request, we'll be potentially, as a department, asking for additional $50,000 in this coming fiscal year, as well as $50,000 in the following fiscal year, primarily as a placeholder for undertaking a comprehensive master plan for bike and pedestrian within the community. We have had conversations with Rhode Island Department of Transportation as well as statewide planning about matching funds and underwriting a substantial portion of that cost. So although there's 50 and 50 proposed over a 2-year period, we may be able to reduce that substantially. With regards to our budget, I want to say 90% of our budget, if not 95%, is salaries. I mentioned we will have funding for our library as well as educational aspects for our staff to stay current. The other item I will potentially add is either within our budget or within the planning board's budget is that continuing education. So we'll be doing those budgets in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And again, you have a planning budget of, I want to say, between $4,000 and $5,000. That is primarily for your stipends. So I want to start small and be realistic, but I would potentially put $1,000 to $2,000 as a line item for education in there. And again, if you talk of, if they actually funded at $2,000, that would be a stipend of $500 for potentially 4 speakers annually. I think
And
that's reasonable. It could pay for a hotel room, dinner, and some travel funds.
And what is the potential for additional money that comes through DOT or Federal Highway? Because it seems like that's where the money is right now.
Again, we're trying to leverage, we have just over 9, our number was adjusted. We originally had $8.95 million of American Rescue Funds. We now have just over $9 million, is about a $120,000 increase. We are constantly trying to find ways to leverage that with the limited staff that we have. Some of our discussions on the Main Street Improvement Program, we supported a grant application by the Rhode Island Department of Transit, RIPTA, to apply for an $8 million grant to look at public safety improvements throughout a number of municipalities in Rhode Island as a first step to then go after construction monies to make improvements to those identified public safety issues within the community. So again, we're constantly trying to leverage money that we have both at the state and federal level. We're trying to go out and get as much as we can. But again, we do not have a full-time grant writer, so being a member of APA and CNU and some of the federal highways and state information, we're trying to flag as much as we can. We have supported through the town manager's office the idea of funding a grant writer position.
They're worth their weight in gold.
There are, with American Rescue Funds, and I think you'll probably see an economic incentive program as the economy continues to change and interest rates continue to climb. I think there will be additional opportunities at the federal level for funding for municipalities.
And when can we get more, or when will more information be available about how that's a lot of the ARPA monies. That's quite a tidy sum. And when will we kind of get updates that are more
We would hope to have
broad?
updates. Again, a new council will come on board later this month. We would hope to update the council and have that information available sometime in January as what our next steps are. Brian Wagner has been working closely with Luke Murray and the town manager's office on the housing component and developing the grant application process for our $375,000 to establish affordable housing within the community. So we are in the final stages of, okay, so we're in the final stages of writing that process, and I think we had a December deadline for trying to get that out onto the street. I know we have potential applicants in the Housing Authority, as well as the Peacedale House and a few others, for deferred maintenance and master planning for evaluating how they can provide additional affordable housing units on their existing campuses.
And what's happening with CDBG money these days?
If you have that answer, I would love for you to share that with us. Again, it's being handled at the state level. It's some items contained within that are on a rolling application process. If you have something that comes forward, you can call them up and see if they have funds available. There's no hard deadline, and there's no regional coordination at this point in time, which goes back to the support for a grant writer who would also be able to undertake community development block grants.
Thanks, Jamie. Planning board training, we sort of touched upon that. Does anyone want to elaborate or feel the need to? All right, planning board liaison activities. Anything interesting that,
Well, we kind of hit on it already. I mean, they're working on some educational outreach stuff, but Brian also has them working on looking at maybe our inclusionary zoning, how it compares to the comprehensive permit, and changes that we can make in inclusionary zoning that perhaps would be a win-win. I think it would be good if, instead of them feeling like it's a push to us, that it's also, we're letting them know it's also a pull, that it's something we want. Maybe if we could give them a couple meetings on their own to figure out what they see as the problem and how they're gonna go about coming up with recommendations. And then, once they start formulating that, maybe they can come in front of us on one of the work sessions and just kind of give us a presentation, and we can give them some guidance, maybe a couple months.
Sure.
Then they know it's something we really want and that we're gonna utilize.
sounds good. Does anyone want to have any information on the 300 committee? Or have you guys have
I
abandoned?
resigned from the committee.
Okay. I know there's blurbs every now and then on the town website, but other than
They
that.
do have a nice website. They are trying to get information out.
The Scenic Stewardship Commission is waiting for an RFQ to become available so that we can move forward with that. Update on legal, recreational cannabis?
Madam Chair, before you go through that, just under Planning Director's update, looking at your calendar and your upcoming meetings,
Oh, yes.
Lynn Smith will be very upset with me if I do not have a discussion with you on solidifying our December calendar. Our recommendation is to have one meeting in December. That would be December 13th, which is scheduled as a work session, but to do that as a regular meeting, and then cancel your December 27th meeting, which is 2 days after the holiday.
Is everyone okay with that?
That 13th is a Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday, yes.
So it's not a work meeting now, it will be
It'll
a regular meeting.
Regular meeting.
Could I ask about the town council who tried to suggest we get together for a joint work session? Are we not talking about that anymore?
We,
To them, right?
I think it's
Didn't they invite us?
the old
That's true.
council. So you have a new council who will be sworn in on the 21st, and their first meeting will be 28th. Again, I can mention that to the town manager.
So I think everybody should keep in mind that we might need to, in 2023, early on in the year, since we do have all these lofty goals, we we might need to double up on some work sessions, since we're skipping the December one.
January, what else are we going to do?
Recreational cannabis, Amy?
Talking hypotheticals anymore. And actually, just for fun,
Just for fun.
no, no,
Yay.
just for fun, I did a chart of the, I gotta find where I put it, but I was looking at it yesterday because I was really curious on, I saw a high margin approved cannabis and SK. And,
And all over the state.
yeah, but I went,
Other than those, like, what was it, 6 or 8 communities?
yeah, I went even a little further. So SK wasn't the highest. The highest margin that approved it where it was actually on the budget was East Providence and Woonsocket at like 62%. So we were tied with some other, Hopkinton, Newport, West Warwick, South Kingstown, were all 60-ish%. And yeah, so Situate, Smithfield, East Greenwich, Jamestown, Barrington, and Little Compton did not pass the referendum. And then there were a handful of cities and towns where the referendum was not put to voters, either because they already had an existing compassion center licensed or existing, or because the council just decided not to put the question before the voters. But now, in any event, it's even more urgent for us to act on and send to council the cannabis ordinance. And I have actually lost track of where we are on that. Have we?
So
I thought we sent it.
the planning board, being the planning board has referred the matter for public hearing to council. Council will have it on their agenda on November 21st, when the new council is sworn in. There are, in essence, I believe, 2 agenda items, the swearing in of the new council and the setting of a public hearing to be held at the December 14th, I believe, town council meeting. So that will be moving forward to public hearing. Under cannabis too, Brian Smith, sitting to my right, also staffs the Economic Development Committee. I thought it was Parker. Oh, sorry. Brian Smith. Brian Wagner, sorry. I have another acquaintance, Brian Smith, who's an attorney for Robinson and Cole, sorry. Brian Wagner, Jason Parker. Brian Wagner staffs EDC, and at their last meeting, they brought up the cannabis discussion and wrote a letter to town council regarding their feeling that the cannabis should be treated in a similar manner as a liquor store, and where liquor stores are allowed, the retail sale of cannabis should also be allowed. Brian just handed that letter out to you. Again, it's a recommendation to council, and you're CC'd on the letter. That's all I have on
Okay.
recreational cannabis. Now remember, it's medical marijuana and recreational cannabis.
Ridiculous. Well, at least we won't be seeing giant billboards like you see when you head north and into Massachusetts, all
Big green leaves, yeah. If they're really clever, they'd have puffs of smoke coming.
I was telling Jamie that my daughter, who lives in Amherst, said that she would vote it down just because of that.
Is this the best time to get us our lighting, our sign ordinance? Quick, before this happens?
It requires 3 weeks for notice. I do not think I can accomplish that with this new council coming in, but it's possible we can get that on the books in early January.
We just need to before an application comes before us with like a giant lit-up thing, right?
well, they can't exceed the current allowable
But the-
size, but the internal
but the
lighting,
backlit thing?
yes. Yep, that's true.
It's primarily internally illuminated or allowed in your downtown, and I believe your highway commercial.
Right.
Not everywhere in town, but just,
And no flashing lights in town, right? Only at URI. URI has one. The change, the ones that change?
The LED signs, yeah, those are prohibited.
Good, because we saw what happened to Richmond with the preserve. It's a jumbotron.
Right, and we also had one here. The pharmacy? Yep. Wakefield Pharmacy, right?
If there's nothing else, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, TRC,
PRC, can you,
that's
the date?
Wednesday, the 14th.
Wednesday,
I can do that.
quick before she changes her mind.
Wait, how about?
This is December.
Wait.
You know,
Do you prefer 9 a.m. or 1 p.m.?
I think 9 would be better.
motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Because we need another bank. Don't have enough of those in town.